Good afternoon. My name is Karen Engel, and I'm glad that's my name. I'm a professor here at the University of Texas School of Law, and I co-direct the Bernard and Audrey Rappaport Center for Human Rights and Justice. On behalf of the family of Francis Tarleton Sissy Farenthold, especially George and Lisa, Dudley and Emily, I welcome you today to a celebration of the life of one of the most remarkable people that most of us in this room have ever known. Sissy passed away on September 26, 2021, just shy of her 95th birthday, after a long life well lived, committed to family, friendship, and social justice. Those of us who are here in person are fortunate to be able to gather in the way that we could not safely do when she died. Sissy's family chose today for the celebration in part because it's Earth Day, which is, according to the official Earth Day website, quote, the moment to change it all, the business climate, the political climate, and how we take action on climate. I think that Sissy would approve. You've come to Austin from near and far to celebrate Sissy's life, from the neighborhood of the university to the streets of Rome. And those watching the live cast span an even wider geographical range. Some of you have known Sissy for all of your lives, and a few knew her during most of her life. Others got to know her more recently or admired her from a near distance. I'm so extremely grateful to Emily, Dudley, George, and Lisa for giving the Rappaport Center and the law school the great honor of hosting this memorial for one of our finest graduates ever. Our Dean, Ward Farnsworth, is unfortunately home ill, but is watching the live cast and sends his well wishes, gratitude, and respect. We're honored to host this event not only because Sissy and much of her family and many of you are our graduates, but because of Sissy's enormous importance to the Rappaport Center and our mission to fight inequality and injustice. Sissy served on our advisory board and participated in nearly every one of our major events over the past 15 years. She also gave us the enormous privilege of working closely with her to tell the story of her career. We digitized her archives, and Joe Bailey and I traveled around the country filming her. And of course, in the process of working together, like so many of you, we developed close friendships as we discussed politics and people late into the night, often interspersed with uncontrollable laughter. Now, documenting Sissy's life and work was a bit of a challenge because she didn't like to talk about herself as much as she liked to talk about politics and ideas. And she didn't really like to reminisce about the past. She always had her mind set on the present and the future. But what made the filming so fun and important is that we didn't just talk to Sissy and then talk to others about her. Instead, we put her in conversation with people she had worked with over the years with the aim of reproducing some of their earlier camaraderie. While it mostly worked out, we sometimes had a hard time with role definition. Because we'd ask the first question, but then, as soon as the other person responded, Sissy would jump in and take over the interview. And she took it over as the interviewer. I realized that she was using these meetings as a chance to call on old friends whose insights into current affairs she was eager to engage. And I'd have to remind her that as good as she was at it, now wasn't the time for her to start a career as a talk show host. We wanted to hear her thoughts too. Now, while Sissy didn't crave to be the center of attention, she didn't exactly mind it either. Or at least she tolerated it if it meant talking about how to better the world. And especially if it ended in a good party, with people connecting and engaging and scheming. So we'll do some of that today. Celebrate Sissy's life in a way that she would want. At the same time, I know that at least for me, none of the scripts that I've prepared in the past about Sissy and her work was quite right for the moment today. Because today also represents the loss of a great human being. Whether as a family member, friend, mentor, collaborator, or comrade, Sissy is irreplaceable. And just as we've not had the opportunity for collective celebration of her life until today, this is also our first opportunity for a collective mourning of our loss. We have a Sissy-worthy array of speakers for you today, family members and friends who knew, loved, and worked with Sissy in multiple capacities. So we're just gonna follow along the program that you have. Each person will introduce themselves to you as they speak. And after the end of the program, we'll make our way out this way to the courtyard for that party. Thank you again for your presence in Sissy's life and today. And we now have the joy of hearing from Sissy's son, George, or Georgie, as Sissy liked to call him.
Well, good afternoon and happy Earth Day. Hello, Austin. I've missed you. We speak of privilege a lot these days, and for good reason. I was perhaps the most privileged of all. My parents, George and Sissy, were members of what Tom Brokaw calls the greatest generation. Sissy understood that much was expected, and she certainly did her best to meet that obligation. I was privileged to witness firsthand the public career of my mother, the energy, the focus, the integrity she poured into every issue she took on. My brother Dudley and my sister Emily join me in sharing heartfelt gratitude for all you've done to walk with my mom throughout her life and for the love and remembrances you have shared with us these past several months. Thank you to each of you for being here. It's not easy, and it's even kind of risky. Know it means the world to my family that you are here with us and that we celebrate Sissy's exceptional life. A life well lived. Sissy died just 6 days before her 95th birthday. Each and every day I give thanks for having her in my life. Wow. I had the best mom ever. Today's celebration is possible because of the love, the dedication, and the hard work of Robert Lalou and Michael Lalou, who's helping run the lights. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Michael. And thank you for all the loving care you gave Sissy in her final months and days. We all know that any day Sissy spent with Robert, a longtime friend and treasured colleague, was a good one. And thanks, too, to my lifetime friend, Annette Adams. Where are you, Annette? Who has been in charge of the refreshments and for planning the reception, which we're looking forward to, a time to keep the stories of Sissy flowing. Karen, I don't have enough words for you. Stalwart, steadfast champion of Sissy's legacy. My mom knew she could always count on you. Your team at UT Law and the Rappaport Center for Human Rights and Justice is amazing. A special thank you to Jacob, who got me this light. And of course to Sabrina Barton for working tirelessly to help establish, get ready, it's a mouthful, the Sissy Farenthold Fund for Peace and Social Justice. This new fund will ensure Sissy's fight for peace and social justice continues. I'm excited to announce that as of today, this fund has reached a milestone. Over, this is a big number in my world, $200,000. Now, one thing our dearly departed friend Mr. Rappaport taught me, and I'll just mimic him a bit. Sonny, you need to ask. So we hope others will join us in honoring Sissy by supporting this important fund and its work. I'm also grateful to be here with my beloved child and Sissy's grandchild, Riley Farenthold Carlson. And Lou Carlson, thank you. Sissy loved being a grandmother. I can tell you a lot more than she enjoyed being my mother. Riley and Lou provided much needed support, not just of Sissy, but as importantly, me in those last weeks and days of my mother's life. Finally, it's a joy to introduce to all of you Austin's newest citizens, my family from New York. Annie, Chris, please stand up and be recognized. This is Annie Ryerson and Chris Dorville. My Carol Ryerson, please, and Julie Ryerson. I hope each of you will take the time to meet them. They are my New York family. And, well, that's where I am more these days. If you can't find me in Washington, it's because I'm upstate. Now, I'm pleased to hand this microphone over to my wife, and the reason New York is now home. When I fell in love with this woman over 20 years ago, come on, darling. Sissy knew that I was dating up. And now I'm married up. Thank you, baby. Break a leg. Lisa is a key leader of the Sissy Fan Club.
That is so true. Oh, good afternoon, everyone. How are you all doing? How y'all doing? Everybody okay? It is so wonderful to add my warm welcome to each and every one of you as we gather together, both in person and also online, to celebrate the life of an extraordinary person, Mary Frances Tarleton Sissy Farenthold. We have been overwhelmed, as you heard George share, with the outpouring of love and generosity since Sissy's death, and it is confirmed for the family the breadth and depth of her friendships, her relationships with you, with people around the world, and with organizations across her lifetime. In fact, as I think about all who are gathered here today, I am struck by the fact that many of you could be giving this tribute. Know that we hope to continue to learn about the adventures you had with Sissy and the good trouble that you got into together. Likely, in my mind, the daughter-in-law seemed like a safe choice to offer a tribute. For sure, I want you to know that I am the fortunate one to be George's wife, to be lucky enough to be the sister-in-law of my beloved Emily and Dudley, and to be one of Riley's moms. It's so wonderful to be here in this space. Thank you to Karen and to all at the Law School of the University of Texas at Austin, a place that holds special significance for Sissy, as her time here as one of very few women in her law school class informed the direction of her life and the direction of her work. And we gather near the Benjamin Dudley Tarleton Library, named for Sissy's grandfather, Judge Tarleton. And we remember also how this university meant so much to her beloved father, also Benjamin Dudley Tarleton. In fact, if your name is Benjamin Dudley Tarleton, please stand so that people can see just how important that name remains in our family. And now, if any part of your name or your family heritage includes Tarleton, Farenthold, Bluntzer, Doherty, Vaughn, Carr, or Redham, and if you are able to, please stand or wave your hand. It is so good to see all of you, and it'll be great to meet some of you later today. I wanted to do that because here's what I knew. After 45 years of my deep connection to Sissy, I know that her family, in fact, was the center of her being. Sissy was a hometown person for her entire life, and I was struck by Arundathi's words at Wednesday's Frances Tarleton Sissy Farenthold Endowed Lecture in Peace, Social Justice, and Human Rights when she spoke about why she remains in India. Arundathi said, "I am a tree. I am a tree whose deep roots remain connected to my home." And I smiled at that moment. I smiled thinking of Sissy and her deeply embedded forever roots in South Texas. Sissy loved home with all of its joys and its challenges, its celebrations and its sorrows. She was an incredible ambassador for Texas throughout her life. And I loved learning about Sissy's life here. And Jean Adams' home in Corpus is among my favorite classrooms. I'm not sure, Jean, if I can or if I should share or repeat many of the stories that I've heard seated around your table filled with good food, great people, and abundant love and laughter. And when you add in time spent with Ann Bright, let me tell you, I learned an awful lot about my Farenthold family. We should all be so fortunate to have lifetime friendships that span 9 decades. How wonderful to have Jean and her family with us today, and the Bright family as well. Thank you for being here. In 1977, on my birthday in August, my first day at Wells College, where Sissy served as our college president, that was the first day that I met Sissy. She was the first woman to hold the role. As you can imagine, it was inspiring and empowering to have her as the leader of my college. With Sissy at the helm, the college thrived and her students thrived as well. Sissy brought the full force of her candor and clarity about the status of women in society and the complexity of deeply embedded national and global social challenges to her leadership. In fact, in our rural village of Aurora, New York, we were lifted out of that environment. Sissy connected us to the wider world and to her vast and broad network. The array of issues she brought forward and kept at the center of our learning, the national and international speakers, her friends who traveled to the Finger Lakes to join us, the policies she moved forward to help us be the most responsible and accountable stewards of our resources, of people, of place, of our environment, financial. Her ability to be an empathetic and active neighbor to every person in that village left a powerful legacy for Wells and for her students, and generations of Wells people, of Wells community members, count Sissy's presidency as a critical time in the college's 154-year history. I imagine that many of you shared this experience, and what I mean by that is that I bet Sissy expanded your thinking and led the way for your activism, an enduring commitment to shining all light on truth and to always, always, always doing what is right. Sissy held transparency as a core value before the concept became more widely accepted. She spoke the truth every day to all, with a focus on using her strength to speak truth to power. Moreover, Sissy was a foremother of diversity, equity, and inclusion. She knew no other path than making space for and sharing power with people who experience structural racism and discrimination. And she fought to the end of her life to build equitable opportunity for everyone in communities around our world. My journey, as you know, with Sissy continued when I became the president of Wells College. She was my mentor and a stalwart source of support for my work in the presidency. She accepted each and every opportunity. She was hesitant in the winter, but she did accept every invitation to return to campus, to return to stay with me and our family at the president's home, and to connect again and share her many gifts and talents with the Wells College community. She only asked for a couple of things in return. Find the New York Times paper copy every morning. Where do you keep the good chocolate? And can I have a lovely cappuccino in the afternoon? In so many ways, Sissy was a conscience for us. She was always ready for a long night, as Karen said, of storytelling, of a good party, and of laughter. Fast forward several years, and Sissy introduced me to George. I want to be really clear with you. Sissy did not intend for that introduction to result in our marriage. But what a joy to have my president, my friend, my colleague, my sister activist become my mother-in-law. I think, like you, I say today, I accept Sissy's call to never give up, to be the champions of true democracy, to lean forward into the headwinds and fight for justice for all. And I hear her name every day. And I say her name. I say it each and every day. Say it with me, Sissy. She lived. And we were the beneficiaries and the stewards of her hard work and of her incredible legacy. And know that she remains with us in the sunsets of Aurora and the ringing of the Wells College bells, in the breeze off Corpus Christi Bay, in the lights of Houston, in the halls of the Texas state capitol, in the call for truth, in the marching on the streets, and in the lives of her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And in all, we commit to continue to honor her.
Let me ask you a question, which is a serious question. Do you think at this time a woman could be nominated as a vice presidential candidate?
When I first ran for office in 1968, in South Texas. I wasn't even a token. I was a joke. There will never be a race that I run, regardless of what it is, that will be as difficult as that first one.
You see, I don't think that it will happen until it's challenged. And I don't believe that the door to public office should be closed to any group in our society. I feel that very deeply. To me, the pursuit of public office is a corollary to full citizenship. And until you're able to pursue that simply as a person without any qualifying adjective, I don't think you have full citizenship.
I was the second of 5 children, and my older brother died when I was 2 and he was 3. It was just a tragedy, not only his death, but the effect it had on my parents. My father used to call me his 2-in-1 child because of the older boy, and we were so close. We were just a year apart. My father was very active against the Ku Klux Klan. For example, he didn't tell me, but he ran for the legislature against the Klan, and he was opposed. And one friend of his told me he was almost tarred and feathered. I never heard that from my father. I just knew he'd run once. He never talked to me about it. He stayed active in politics, but never pursued office. College was a very different place during the war. There's no question about it. I got the idea from then that more was expected of you than just a college degree. You were focused on what are you going to do with your life. I graduated when I was 19. I knew that going to law school was probably what I could do without having any objections from my parents. My father was very pleased with the fact because his father had taught there, and my father was a great supporter of the University of Texas and the law school as well. So that's how I came to the law school, and I enjoyed the work tremendously. But as one of the few women enrolled there at the time, just a handful, we were subject to all kinds of speculation, which I really found offensive. I didn't have a word for it. But looking back, the term that applies is sexism, and it was rampant. It was rampant.
There was the slightly decade older than me feminine mystique part of feminism that was more conservative and also didn't include my life experience. But then here was Sissy, who was in the decade ahead of me and had all the radicalism and all the issues and all the access and all the refusal to take any boundaries, you know, and that meant a lot to me, you know, because I felt I had somebody ahead of me on the path.
John Lewis, the great civil rights icon, was arrested 2 days ago for the 45th time. And John Lewis is fond of saying, you've got to get into trouble. You got to do good trouble, necessary trouble. And when I think about Sissy, I think about somebody who goes around Texas and around the United States and around the world getting into trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble.
I've often said if you want to get from the Galleria fast to downtown during traffic time, take a squad car. We'd zoom through traffic. It was 5 o'clock traffic.
Even if they believe in the issue, if it's somehow not too politically, it could affect them politically, or you know, a lot of people won't say it, even if they believe in it. But that's not Sissy. She'll speak out on it, regardless of any personal consequences. So, she's courageous.
You know, my fondest the memories of Sissy are cumulative. One thing that she tried built on another thing. What she did for women, what she did in confronting governments, what she did as president of a college, every step of the way, she developed and built. And she brought then to the Institute this sense of purpose. She could and she should win the Nobel Prize for her organization work and for peace.
Not to embarrass her, but she deserves not the Nobel Prize for Peace, but the Citizens Prize for Nobility in the Common Good. Rarely indeed, few like Sissy come along. And I don't mean to over-personalize it, but the fact of the matter is, this is what I want to say, they matter. But Sissy actually came along and became a part of history. Remember, Martin Luther King said the arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice. Well, Sissy's a part of that.
You can do better than that for Sissy. Let's give her another rousing applause. I'm Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and I represent the 18th Congressional District in Houston, Texas, and I'm howdy darn glad to be here. And thank you to George and Dudley and Emily and all the grandchildren, great-grands, extended family members, and those who are now trying to find Farenthold in their names. I know there are many of you in this room. I might argue that I've already done that. I love the fact that I had Sissy in my life. And so I will say her name, Lisa. I will see now Mary Frances, Sissy, Talton, Farenthold. I hope I'm somewhere near all those names. I love it. Say her name. Just a little bit of church. Thank God that he gave us Sissy Farenthold for 95, I'm going to claim it, 95 years. Thank you, Karen, for sharing this school and this institute with us, and thank you for an institute that addresses the question of human rights. I thought that I would have taken off my Ukraine button for its brightness and boldness, but I said that's just what Sissy is all about, but that's wanting peace. I'm delighted to be here, and I must do a little hometown, Art Ponin and all the Houstonians. If you're from Houston, stand up and let me see you. That's what we do in church. If you're from Houston, stand up and let us see you. Come on now, let's applaud these folks. We are well registered. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to have a homecoming and a family reunion with Curtis Graves. You'll hear from him soon. But I tell you, I'm so honored and privileged to be with him and his walk in history and his love for Sissy. Just give him a big hand even before he comes up. So I'm going to take a moment down memory lane just for a moment and try to characterize what Sissy has meant to all of us as women, as young women, as younger women, as public servants, as politicians. As Barbara Jordan, her friend, said, I don't care if you call me a politician, just call me a darn good one. And clearly, as she made her life's journey, Sissy Farenthold was a good many things. And I'm reminded of these words that she said, and I said, I have lived my life in the shadow of that power. I've lived it all of my life, and I do not intend to be deterred. That is how she lived her life. Born out of a pioneering family, one with great history, and has seen her father with the courage to fight against the Klan. And yet, even in tragedy, he found a way to encourage and to say that his daughter was equal. He was the ERA before we even started. Daddy Talton said, you go to law school, you graduate from college, you make a difference, you graduate at 16 and 19, and you graduate at 22 from the University of Texas School of Law. Tell me that's not unique, tell me that's not powerful, tell me that's not Sissy, and tell me that's not the Talton family. What a role model they were. And through her life, came up against the powerful forces, and she said through her life, and she would not be deterred. I loved her for that. No matter how big or small the issue was, women's rights, reproductive rights. Look where we are in Texas today. We need to call on Sissy. Who would ever have thought that all the hard-fought work that Sarah did and all of you did, that we'd be in a place where we're looking at no more reproductive rights and people stalking young women and others in the midst of their decisions. We need to say that we will not be deterred. We live in the shadow of power all of our lives, but we will not be deterred. She fought for reproductive rights. She fought against big business and the wrongness of taxation that wasn't reformed. Even in those days, and yes, she was out there fighting corruption. We members of the United States Congress who happen to be in the Democratic caucus, we've taken corruption as our issue. I can assure you the mountain is large. But we're in the back seat compared to when she began to talk about Sharpstown and the many words you would whisper. Oh, don't disturb that. Those are your colleagues. She was bold. How did I start? She lived in the shadow of power all of her life, and she did not intend to have it and have her life and her life's work deterred. I love Sissy because no matter how small the issue was as she lived in Houston in those years now toward her death, she was no less the activist, no less the person advocating for peace, no less the fighter for justice, no less incensed by the tragedy of George Floyd in the real late years of her life. She fought for the rights of unempowered Mexican-American women in Corpus as she took up the legal services work, practicing lawyer that she was, having raised 5 beautiful children. And so today I think it is important that we not only use the words legend, icon, visionary, and trailblazer, that we don't give the list of the greatness of the things that she's done, the many places she's been, the organizations that she's led, but that this is a time to get that spiritual feeling that you have when you are either in reflection of your own spiritual grounding. It is to reflect on what you will do to live her life. How will you carry forward the message of a Sissy Farenthold? And as I thought of it, I could celebrate all of her achievements, the positions, the offices she ran for, Particularly, it is important to me that very question, do you think a woman can be vice president of the United States? I certainly think at that very time, and I love all of our Democratic nominees, let me not speak ill of anyone, but I certainly think at that time that they would have been well suited to get Frances Sissy Farenthold on their ticket. She would have been the greatest and the best and the first vice presidential candidate and a woman. We look back on what we may have lost, but thank goodness we had the right to gain by having her live with us and through us. It is important to take note of the fact that when she walked on the floor of the Texas legislature, she was the first woman that had walked on that floor in that time. She was the only woman there against power and standing with power when they would do what she said to do. The legislature was her place of thriving and fighting for the Equal Rights Amendment, which ultimately became law, and where she could express herself for the most vulnerable, dealing with the improvement of the benefits of women on welfare. I love when people take their experiences rather than leaving them at the door to ensure that their experience as a woman, as a mother, could be utilized in their legislative agenda. And so as she was a true pioneer, I also like her as a freedom fighter. I spent a week in Poland. I was in Lithuania when the Russians came in. We had then spent a week, maybe of our own self-impression that we could speak to Russians for them to take a message for Putin to stand down. At that time, in February 24th, he invaded Ukraine. And since that time, I need not relate to you the brutality, the violence, the lack of peace. On many instances, I've said, get to the peace table. Because I believe, as Sissy Farenthold has taught us, when she stood in the place where shadows might have made her light dark, she was bright. When Gorbachev and Reagan were meeting, she established the peace tent and said that if women could come in places where there were conflict, women could get the job done. I happen to think maybe a few women over there right now could get the job done. How about coming back with me? So my tribute here today is to be able to enforce the force that she was. The force in my life, always looking for her affirmation and approval. As a member of the United States Congress, when we come together, wanted to make sure I was okay with Sissy Farenthold. Wanted to make sure I learned from her. Wanted to make sure she was in my ear to say, you really need to be doing this. She was certainly in my ear during Iraq and Afghanistan. That was good. We needed that. Houston needed her. Her law practice early on, but the life of activism, the work she did for the Untitled Chapter, and so much presence that she had. And yes, she loved her family, but she adopted us, Houston, as her family as well. And in this moment, when we need Herculean leaders or people who are willing to push against power and not be deterred, I want to say thank you to her family for sharing her. And I want to say thank you because I know that she flies high where the eagles fly. She's listening to us right now. Thank her for all of the women leaders that she has inspired. Thank you for the Herculean efforts that she made, the change agent that she is and was, the idea of looking toward legislation and policy and fight to make a difference. I'm reminded of the words of Coretta Scott King, and she said, freedom and justice cannot be parceled out in pieces to suit the political conveniences. I don't believe you can stand for freedom for one group and not stand for freedom for another group. Well, I want you to know your mother, your grandmother, your beloved relative, your beloved friend, your spiritual leader, your women empowerment, That is what I saw in her, a freedom fighter, a person who believed that all persons needed freedom, and she was not going to selfishly say, you deserve freedom and you do not. Whatever cause it was for justice, we could always call upon our friend and our sister. Battle-worn, but never defeated. Battle-worn, but never defeated. Battle-worn, but never defeated. Even in death, she stands as the person who clearly says, I've walked in the shadow of power, but I do not intend for it to deter me. I walk away from this podium saluting and loving my friend and say to her, if I can be half the woman you are, I will walk and not be deterred. God bless all of you. God bless the United States of America.
Good afternoon. I'm the Curtis Graves that Sheila referred to. I want to thank the family, especially George, for calling me and asking me whether I'd be a part of this tribute to Sissy because she meant so much to me. Besides my parents and Bob Eckhart, whose name probably rings a bell to a few people in here, Sissy Farenthold was probably the fourth most influential person in my life. I got my initial guidance and my North Star direction and all of those kinds of things that parents give you from my mother and father. When I decided to get into politics, I was fortunate to run into Bob Eckhart, and he showed me and taught me what political action and politics was all about, and that was important. But let me tell you a story about Sissy Farenthold. I was elected to the state legislature in 1966. My first session was 67. I was one of three that was elected at the same time. Barbara Jordan was elected to the Senate. I was elected to the House, and the third person was a guy named Joe Lockridge. Barbara really had no interest in race things or really controversial things, so she was not there to stand on the table to make sure that we didn't have as many guns in the state as we had, or to do the other kinds of things that I got involved in eventually. And Joe Lockridge was a captive of the Dallas establishment. They found him. He was a lawyer, a Howard graduate, a brilliant guy, but because of the fact that the Dallas establishment found him, ran him, and controlled him, he didn't want to get involved in anything controversial at all. So it fell upon me to represent, Sheila, the largest flotorial district in the state of Texas. I represented all the black folks from El Paso to Beaumont, from the Panhandle to the Rio Grande Valley. I was all in my district, as well as the 23rd Legislative District, which was identical to Bob Eckhart's congressional district. So if somebody was beaten up in the Texas Department of Corrections who happened to be black, and they happened to be from Abilene, I got the call. And so I tried to handle all those things at the same time. I found myself being a one-man band. I was playing the snare drums and the timpani. I was playing the trumpet and the violin with the other hand. My feet were working on whatever instrument that could get, and the tune might have been coherent to some people, but it wasn't coherent to many, because I was trying to do too many things at one time. For instance, nobody had ever introduced a bill to outlaw the use of DDT as an insect, as a pesticide. Nobody. I introduced that bill and caused more controversy among the farmers in Texas than you could imagine. Nobody had ever introduced a bill. Nobody had ever introduced a bill to slow the sale of handguns down. And now I'm told, and I know because I went in the legislature, in the legislative chambers, the last legislative session, and members of the House and the Senate walk around the metal detector with their guns, and still carry their guns in the legislature. Thank God they didn't when I was there, because I probably would have gotten shot. I introduced a bill to make it possible for us to see some black faces in history books. No contributions of black people, no mention of slavery, no nothing was pronounced. Now we call that critical race theory, It's the same thing. There were 2 sets of textbooks printed in the United States, a set for California, New York, and the New England states, and a set for the rest of the nation. And Texas drove that with the Texas Textbook Committee. The rest of the nation got books with 1 paragraph mentioning people who were working on plantations, and 1 little picture of a guy behind a mule on the north end of a southbound mule plowing. That was the only mention, no mention of the word slavery at all. Well, I got involved in everything. Well, the first session was over with, and I thought I knew a lot about legislating. And then I had heard that a lady was running for the legislature from Corpus Christi, and I had not met her until the first day of the legislative session in '69. It was my second term, and I thought I knew everything until I met her. I met her on day 1, and I wanted to make sure that she knew who I was, and I knew who she was, and I knew a little about her. So I tried to spend as much time with her as I could. We were sworn in about mid-January. About the end of February, Sissy Farenthold had thrown a net over Curtis Graves. She had figured out that I was about too much, and I didn't really understand coalition building. I didn't understand the coordination of putting people together. I didn't understand that you needed a lot of people in your band to come up with a coherent tune that other people would appreciate better. And that's what Sissy Farenthold gave me then that stuck with me for the rest of my life. She and I created the Dirty 30. The press called it the Dirty 30, but we called it the Clean 30. Because the rest of the group were dirty, and we were the ones who were clean. Now, that first session, there was a lot of corruption, and there was not 1 woman nor 1 Republican. Can you believe I served in the legislature for a whole session, and there was not 1 Republican in the whole House of Representatives? Wouldn't that be fun today? Well, the second session, there were 2, and they were from the Houston area, and we had Sissy. And Sissy and I put together this group of roughly 30 people. Sometimes we got to be 35 or 40. We couldn't pass that much, but we could sure stop a hell of a lot. And that's really what we got about the business of doing. When the Sharpstown scandal broke, Sissy and I were on the case. We were trying to find ways to expose this. My first session, I looked upon my service as that of being an educator. I could educate people about the stupidity of having everybody with a gun in their hand But I couldn't pass a bill that would change that. So I introduced the bill, tried to get as much education about it across the state by doing some crazy things in order to get their attention. But on the other hand, at least people would know about it, but there wouldn't be legislation. With Sissy, we made things happen because we caused the coalition of people to come together that was sometimes, I said, more than 30 because of the fact that there were two Democratic parties in the state at the time. There was the John Connally Democrats, you remember those, huh? Okay. And then there was the Ralph Yarborough Democrats. And I was a Ralph Yarborough Democrat along with Sissy Farenthold, and as by the way, along with Bernard Rappaport. We were all in the Ralph Yarborough camp, and we did everything we could to bring about the progressive agenda in the state. Well, Sissy was, she changed my life, really, because she made me mellow into the kind of person that understood that you can't lead the band and be a member of the band and play all the instruments all at one time, but you really had to have people with you in order to make things happen. That's what NATO is all about. That's what a lot of things are all about, where you have to get people with you to make change happen. It's been an honor for me to be here with you today. George told me I didn't have but 5 minutes. I've already taken 10, and I got about 30 more minutes to go, George, but I think I'm gonna give it up. Thanks.
Good afternoon, family, distinguished guests, and friends of Sissy. I'm Lulu Flores, an attorney, UT Law grad, and former president of the National Women's Political Caucus. I'm honored to have been invited here today to share my thoughts about one of my sheroes and role models. I want to thank George and the family for giving me this opportunity. I was so excited to be asked, but the more I thought about this, I began to wonder how I could possibly do her justice and what I could say to capture her essence. I quickly realized that while I cannot speak for what she meant to the world, I can capture what her life and purpose meant to me and how it helped shape who I've become. I'll start by describing Sissy through my eyes and through a lot of people's eyes. She was iconic, a legend, a feminist, an activist who was determined, courageous, stoic, and elegant, a woman who cared about equality, justice, and peace, and who was a mother first and foremost and always. She was a role model who I admire and share many parallels with, a South Texas girl, a Libra, a lawyer, a feminist, and somebody who wants to stand up and do what's right. Back in 1968, when Sissy first got elected to the State House, I was 13, and when she was running for governor in '72, I was elected junior class president and was more worried about putting on the best junior-senior prom ever than I was about the state of affairs in Austin. But my sister Angie was already at UT and was well aware of the politics of the day and was supporting McGovern and knew all about Sissy and her nomination for vice president. As I made my way to Austin to college, I became more politically aware and learned all about Sissy's significance. And when I went to work at the Capitol while in law school, and later through my connection with the National Women's Political Caucus, I learned so much more. I didn't actually meet her until many years later through my future mother-in-law, Joan Ehrlich. Joan and Sissy became friends through mutual connections in Houston's political, art, and women's circles. They also both shared a love for the Rothko Chapel and its work. Through Joan, I got access to Sissy and came to know her as a person and not the political icon that I admired from afar. I witnessed firsthand her elegance, wit, passion, and commitment. Our caucus roots brought us together over the years. In early 2000s, we honored her with a Shattered Glass Award for her years of advocacy for women's equal rights. Then after I became president of NWPC and stepped into Sissy's shoes 24 years later, we did joint interviews and documentaries to share our memories and oral history about it. By then, of course, Sissy was way past the caucus and was deep in her journey for peace and human rights and making her mark around the world. As I was leaving my second term as NWPC president in 2011, we honored Sissy at our 40th anniversary as one of our founding mothers. We were all so excited that she was there to celebrate with us and celebrate this important milestone. And then at our 2013 convention here in Austin, I nominated her, and she received one of the Women of Courage Awards for her continued activism on behalf of women and human rights. And not only did we share NWPC in common, but we shared my husband, Scott. Let me explain. Sissy and Scott also met through Joan, and they became good friends. Sissy sought out Scott's counsel on matters regarding the management of the Rothko Chapel, and she invited him to join the board. They became allies, and she relied on his support on board issues and finding an executive director after the passing of Mrs. DeMenil and the retirement of their long-standing director. Sissy occasionally stayed at our home as she traveled to Austin for various business matters and engagements. I remember getting to know another side of her, a more relaxed and casual Sissy, one who would sit in our kitchen in a white, fluffy guest robe, sipping Scott's perfect coffee while we discussed pressing matters of the day, of course. Scott loved to pamper her, and she loved to be doted on by him. I'm pretty sure she didn't relax often because she was always working and globetrotting and being the inimitable activist and leader she was. She was hard to keep up with, even in her 80s and early 90s. Her passion and commitment to causes and issues she believed in was awe-inspiring. She was always on a mission to leave this world a better place, and that she certainly did, from cleaning up the Texas house to paving the way for finding peace. She may not have solved the world's problems, but she helped plant the seeds of change her entire life, and her legacy is leaving so many people who she inspired committing to carry the torch for justice and equality and peace. My hope is that we can continue in her image with the vigor, energy, intensity, and urgency she embodied. Because even though there will only be one Sissy, the world needs so many more like her. As I work towards following in her footsteps yet again by serving in the Texas House, my prayer to Sissy is, please be with me and give me the courage to stand up like you did. Thank you, Sissy, for all you did for your family, your community, and the world. We are better because of you. And if I may, I'd like to tell you that the National Women's Political Caucus has signed a resolution in her honor, and if I could read it real quick. I have it on my phone, so bear with me. Whereas the National Women's Political Caucus, NWPC, was founded in 1971 by over 300 diverse women across the nation and has proudly been active for the last 50 years. And whereas NWPC is a national pro-choice, multi-partisan grassroots membership organization dedicated to identifying, recruiting, training, and supporting women candidates for elected and appointed office. And whereas the Honorable Frances Carlton Sissy Farenthold was elected the first chair of the NWPC at their first convention in San Antonio, Texas. And she was a strong and measured voice and leader for our organization. Whereas Sissy exemplified the mission of the National Women's Political Caucus to place more women in elected and appointed office. And whereas Sissy was also an elected member of the Texas House of Representatives, was a candidate for governor of Texas, and was nominated as U.S. vice presidential candidate by NWPC founders Gloria Steinem and Franny Lou Hamer. And whereas NWPC mourns the loss of such a vibrant, thoughtful, passionate, and effective woman leader who embodied all the attributes that the NWPC admires and seeks to instill in its candidates and leaders. Now, therefore, I, Donna Lent, President of the National Women's Political Caucus, on behalf of the Board of Directors and its members, hereby declare our sincere gratitude for the life and contributions of Frances Sissy Farenthold and offer our heartfelt condolences to her family and friends on this day of her memorial service. Rest in power, Sissy. Signed this 22nd day of April, 2022, by Donna Lent.
Hello, this is Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia of Houston. Growing up in South Texas, I often watched as a Corpus Christi area news anchor begin stories with, "Today, Frances Sissy Farenthold filed suit against," and it was always about helping the poor, the underrepresented, and the underdog. I watched and wondered, I want to do that someday. Throughout the years, I watched as she was elected a Texas legislator, leading the Dirty 30, and then running for governor. That was my first campaign, Farenthold for governor. I helped organize students in Denton County. She was a dear friend of mine who inspired me to always do my best and reach for new heights. She supported me in all my races and reminded me that public service is just that, service to the public, not politics, but people. I looked up to Sissy because she was a trailblazer who worked remarkably hard and eventually became a force across the Lone Star State and the nation. When I heard her name placed in nomination for Vice President of the United States at the 1972 Democratic Convention, I couldn't have been prouder. Her impact improved the lives of countless Texans. She's been a role model to many, including me. I'm so glad I met Sissy and that I went from watching her on the news to working with her on so many projects that made the news. She was a gentle, kind spirit, seeking peace and the best in humankind. She is dearly missed by all who knew her, including me. Sissy was one of a kind, a Texas gem.
Hello, friends. I'm your Congressman Al Green. Thank you for being a part of this commemoration ceremony. I truly regret that I cannot be in the room with you, but I am eternally grateful to have the opportunity to say just a few words about someone who made a difference in my life. Frances Farenthold, or Sissy as most of us knew her, was not only the courageous figure that inspired people around the world, she was also a loving and kind mentor to so many of us. Through her goodwill and strength of character, she touched so many of us. To me, she was more than a lodestar of the progressive movement in Texas. She exemplified progressive action in her life, long before we had the academic language to describe the ways in which institutional oppression interacts with our daily lives. Sissy talked about the intersection between different forms of oppression. She saw injustice and refused to be a bystander, even when it cost her a great deal politically. As a member of the Texas legislature, she was the leader of the Dirty 30, a courageous group of lawmakers who sought to root out the blatant corruption in the state. Many of our state's ethics reforms were pioneered by Sissy and her fellow Dirty 30 members. As a candidate for governor, Sissy's dedication to being an honest and straightforward champion for the people forced her to make hard decisions on issues such as abortion and busing. This honesty cost her politically. However, this is but another reason those of us who loved her then still admire and love her so much today. To many of us, Sissy was far more than a progressive legislator or gubernatorial candidate who upended Texas politics. To me, she was a lifelong mentor. She was the reason I went into and remain in politics. Sissy expanded my perception of public service and what it was all about and what it can achieve. I will be eternally grateful for the privilege I had of meeting and knowing the Honorable Frances Sissy Farenthold. My only hope is that I have been able to pass along to some of the many people I've met her special talents and her means by which she could inspire others to do great things. Sissy, I miss you, and I will always remember you.
I'm Genevieve Vaughn, and Sissy and I are both born in Corpus Christi, and we were double cousins. Her father, Dudley Tarleton, was my grandmother's brother, and her mother, Catherine Blunzer Tarleton, was my grandfather's niece. Both of us went to Hockaday School in Dallas, and then she went to Vassar while I went to Bryn Mawr. Sissy was 13 years older than I was, so I didn't know her very well when I was young. She was usually away at school, and then I was. Back then, what I thought about her was that she was the most beautiful person in the family, and everybody admired her because she was so smart. Another thing we had in common was that then we both married European men. I moved to Italy while she stayed in Texas. I followed her political career from afar. At one time, she and George came to Italy on a visit for other reasons, but otherwise we didn't see much of each other. In 1979, I got a divorce, and at that time decided to try to use the money I had inherited for social change. I did not know how to do it, so I asked Sissy to help me. That was the beginning of a collaboration that lasted some 20 years or so. And during that time, we had many wonderful adventures, as well as doing a lot of good. My political and feminist consciousness had been raised in Italy, so we were on similar wavelengths. I don't have much time now, so I'll just tell a couple of stories very briefly. I came back to live in the United States in 1983, and I believe it was 1984 that this happened. Sissy was asked by an anti-apartheid group in Houston to help with a demonstration at the South African consulate, which was in a downtown high-rise building there, and she asked me to join her. It was decided that we would go inside the consulate while the others in the group would stay on the ground and continue the demonstration downstairs. Just let me change the page. So Sissy made an appointment with the consul for that day, and we dressed up in our most ladylike clothes, and we went. The reason she had given was that we wanted to talk about the UN Decade for Women conference in Nairobi, which was to happen in 1985. The consul greeted us politely, and we sat down in his office to talk. Sissy told him that we wanted to invite Winnie Mandela to speak at the Women's Conference. And we discussed that possibility with him for about 30 minutes, in which I remember he gave us the party line about South Africa's policies. I believe he had a couple of phone calls during that time telling him about the demonstration downstairs. At a certain point, Sissy started criticizing the South African government and saying that they should get on the right side of history. So the consul said, You are not really here about the women's conference, are you? And we had to say, no, we are not here. But for that, we are in solidarity with the protesters downstairs. So they led us to a room and locked us in, where we waited for about half an hour for the police to come get us. When they did, they were two African-American policemen who handcuffed us and led us down the long corridor of the consulate, which had doors opening from maybe 10 different offices onto it. All the consulate employees looked out of their doors and stared at us as we were being escorted away. The policemen drove us to the jail, and Sissy tried to talk to them along the way. As I remember, we stayed in our cell until late that night when somebody somehow got us out of there. So that was a wonderful memory. And pretty typical of the things Sissy did. In 1985, we created a peace tent at the Women's Conference in Nairobi in collaboration with Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. We had gathered a group which we called Feminists International for Peace and Food, who womaned the tent, where women whose countries were in conflict could dialogue with each other. We collaborated with Russian women in much of this. I remember the collaboration got started when we helped each other to set up the chairs in the venue. Then when some of our group got sick, a doctor that the Russians had brought helped them. Back in that period, there were so many citizens' initiatives for peace with the Soviet Union. It is tragic to think how useful they might be now if they still existed. The women's solidarity movement was particularly strong. Sissy and I and a number of other women we knew went to a women's conference organized by the Soviet Women's International Democratic Federation in Moscow in 1987. I remember particularly sitting next to Sissy at an event in the big Congress Hall of the Kremlin, and both of us marveling at being there, where all the big Soviet decisions were debated and confirmed. Sissy was saying, "What would Topsy say if she could see us here?" Topsy was our aunt in Corpus Christi, who was about as far right politically as you could get. There are so many stories I could tell, but since I have such a short time, I just want to mention that Sissy was also a kind and good person. She took care of people, especially family, even those she profoundly disagreed with, like Aunt Topsy. I believe Sissy was really Topsy's mainstay until Topsy's death at 90. That is, underneath her politics, Sissy also had the human virtues of integrity and care that are so badly needed in these times. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Robert Lalois, and I'm here because I simply adored Sissy Farenthold. She was my hero, and my mentor, and my buddy, and my best friend. And I think I can say without fear of successful contradiction that for the last 10 or 15 years of her life, I was her best gay. And I just want to say, because when I told her this years ago, Sissy actually asked me to repeat it at an occasion such as this one, that I know that the rap on her was that she was the melancholy rebel. But I thought she was a blast. Fun and funny and fabulous. And I can't tell you how many nights we stayed up late together trying on lipsticks and caftans. and gossiping about Gloria Vanderbilt and Princess Margaret, and reading Vogue and counting Barbara Hutton's husbands, and in general, just having a hell of a time. And those were some of the happiest, funniest, best times of my entire life, and I'll remember them and miss them forever. Anyway, I'm here to read a poem that's always reminded me of Sissy. It's by Stephen Spender, and it's called The Truly Great. I think continually of those who were truly great, who from the womb remembered the soul's history through corridors of light where the hours are suns, endless and singing, whose lovely ambition was that their lips, still touched with fire, should tell of the Spirit, clothed from head to foot in song. What is precious is never to forget. The essential delight of the blood drawn from ageless springs, breaking through rocks in worlds before our earth. Never to deny its pleasure in the morning simple light, nor its grave evening demand for love. Never to allow gradually the traffic to smother with noise and fog the flowering of the Spirit. Near the snow, near the sun, in the highest fields, see how these names are fetid by the waving grass and by the streamers of white cloud and whispers of wind in the listening sky. The names of those who in their lives fought for life, who wore at their hearts the fire's center. Born of the sun, they traveled a short while toward the sun and left the vivid air signed with their honor. Thank you. Now, thank you so much for coming, and we hope that you'll join us at the reception in the Patman Plaza, which is right through these doors, through the left and at the end of the corridor. Thank you very much.